and welcome to Dialogue. As the world's first and second largest economies, the economic and trade relations between China and the U.S., as well as the development of each nation, are crucial to the stability and prosperity of the global economy. Currently, China is further deepening its economic reforms, while the U.S. is facing a series of changes related to Donald Trump's return to the White House. How is China's reform progressing? What is the future direction? What impact will Trump's tariff threat have on Sino-U.S. trade relations? And how will that reshape the global economy? Join us for our discussion today. I'm Xu Qinduo. My special guest today is Nobel Prize Laureate in Economic Science, Professor Joseph Stiglitz from Columbia University.
Professor Joseph Stiglitz won the Nobel Prize in Economic Science in 2001. He previously served as the Senior Vice President and also the Chief Economist at the World Bank, and also served as the Chairman of the U.S. Council of Economic Advisors. He has been studying China's economic growth for decades and has a deep understanding of how China has carried out its grand economic transformation to become the world's second largest economy in just a few decades. As a world-renowned economist, Professor Stiglitz firmly believes a trade war against China by the U.S. is unwise and unwinnable.
Welcome to Dialogue, Professor. And I know that you have been following the Chinese economic development for years. So how do you look at the development, the growth of the economy over the past decades with reform and opening up?
Well, it's been a very difficult period over the last decade. If you go back a little bit before, there was first the global financial crisis in 2008. China responded to that very forcefully and was the source of the global economic recovery. But then, just a little bit later, 2017 was, you might call, the Trump shock to the global economy, and then you had the pandemic. And now you have another Trump shock. So these are very difficult times for every country. But I think one should use the opportunity of the short run, the need, for instance, for stimulus for demand to make sure that young people have jobs and the economy continues to grow, to use those funds to help move the structural transformation that China will need. China has emphasized reform as an ongoing process, and China made very successfully the transformation from rural to urban, from agriculture to manufacturing, but now there are several big transformations from manufacturing to a service-based, innovation, digital economy. There are changes in globalization that are happening, deglobalization, some people call it. And there are big demographic changes. And then there's the green transition, all happening at one time. And to change the economy in a way that can continue to raise the living standards of everybody in that context is really hard. And obviously, progress has been in some areas, but not as much as one might have liked.
Mm-hmm. Obviously, multiple challenges, and the Chinese government has basically pouring out policies of stimulus, for example, trade-in policies with home appliances, and also, super long these treasury bonds, and also measures to stimulate or to stabilize the property sector. And of course, the Chinese economy, one transition is like transition away from the reliance on the property sector, on investment, to consumption. How do you look at the recent series of measures to stimulate growth and to stabilize the property sector, for example, etc.?
The property sector problems are very much related to the structure of the financing of local government. Local government sells land, and land then needs to get developed. That's not a viable model for the long-term way of financing local government. One needs either transfers from the central government to help local governments, and that in turn needs higher taxes at the central government level, or there needs to be taxes at the local level. There are a whole range of taxes that would actually improve the economy that China should impose. Increase efficiency and equity. Property tax, capital gains tax, environmental taxes, carbon taxes, other kinds of environmental taxes, financial transactions taxes. So there are a bundle of taxes that could raise a very large amount of revenue, and that would get the local governments out of this syndrome of trying to finance themselves by land sales, promoting the property sector, when that's not the best way of financing local government.
Mm-hmm. It seems like that kind of practice probably is over, and now because of the problems in the property sector. If we can focus a little bit on the property sector, of course, there are a series of measures to stabilize the sector. The government has made it very clear the goal is not to increase the price, it's to stabilize it. And recent data from the Ministry of Housing and Urban Rural Development show that we do see sales is picking up, and especially in the first-tier cities like Beijing, Shenzhen, Guangzhou. And of course, Goldman Sachs, for example, they predicted that the property prices would be bottom out in the later half of next year, 2025, and then the market will rise by average of 2% 2 years later.
Well, let me say more broadly, there's a tension between wanting to have a stable price, and of course people who bought the property want to keep the price at a high level, because their savings are so much in there, and making housing affordable, particularly for young people, very young people who are having a difficult time now getting a job. They would like a low price. So there's a fundamental mismatch here. I think that there needs to be attention, both by the government and the private sector, on making sure that there's the kind of housing in the places where young people need the housing. And so I think there's going to be a need for, the focus has been on stabilizing the property market as a whole. For me, the most important issue is making sure that there's housing available at affordable prices for especially the young people as they enter the market and get married and begin their lives.
Yeah, for the people with real need rather than speculation.
Housing as an asset is very important for people's lifetime, but houses are where you're supposed to live. And sometimes this idea of housing as an asset and housing as a place where we need to live get in contradiction to each other. And I think we have to bring those better together.
It's like striking a balance.
Exactly.
Well, of course, either China or the U.S. or any country, they are not standing alone. They are interconnected. For example, China-U.S., of course. Now, as you mentioned, Trump is returning to the White House. So, what's the possible impact? Let's first focus on the U.S. economy, for example. Next 4 years, what kind of impact do you expect on the U.S. economy?
Well, I think this reinforces what I said before about the need, urgency to shift towards a more domestically driven, demand-driven economy, because there will probably be attempts to restrict exports. And most people think that they probably will be more effective than they were previously. He's threatened higher tariffs, and the WTO is much weaker than it was 8 years ago. So Trump has said he loves tariffs. You know, Americans are worried that it will be a source of an enormous amount of corruption, because he will give exemptions to the tariffs for people who give campaign contributions, or where there's certain very adverse impacts on the U.S. economy. China, I think, is appropriately saying that it's committed to a rules-based system, even if the United States isn't. It's become the champion of the rules-based international order. And China has talked about unilateral opening, and saying, like, we're making our economy even more open. China will almost surely have to do is to enhance this domestically demand-driven economy, but also shift the focus of some of its trade to other countries.
Mm-hmm. Well, if you focus on the tariffs from Trump, what's his purpose? Bring back manufacturing jobs, or fixing the so-called trade deficit problem?
As Americans look at it, it's a total failure. It didn't work before, and it won't work again. And this is, almost every economist will agree with what I'm about to say. To the extent that it brings back jobs, reduces imports from China, those goods that are produced in the United States will be produced by robots. That's not going to create the jobs that they want. Much of it will be production that occurs in other countries, not in China, but in other developing countries. He's going to put tariffs on them too, but there still will be lower tariffs than on Mexico. The cost of living of Americans is going to go up, and so the standard of living of Americans is going to go down. Economists say that the size of the trade deficit is basically determined by macroeconomic factors. It is the gap between domestic aggregate savings and domestic aggregate investment. And Trump's economic agenda, with his tax cuts for billionaires and for corporations, is going to lead to lower aggregate domestic savings. And that will increase the size of the deficit that we will have to fill. So my belief is that it is likely what happened last time will happen this time. That is, the U.S. trade deficit will actually get worse, not better.
Mm-hmm. And then what kind of impact that will have on this relationship, trade relationship between China and the U.S.?
Well, let me say, Trump doesn't understand any of the economics that I just explained. In some ways, he has a very simple view of the world, which is a zero-sum view of the world. It's very transactional. And so he will either claim that you're doing some trick, like exchange rate manipulation. Alternatively, he'll approach you for a deal. You buy more American agricultural goods, and he'll reduce the tariffs. Now, the interesting thing about that from the global point of view, it doesn't make much difference whether China buys food from America or soybeans from the United States or soybeans from Brazil. It's a global market, And if China buys more from the United States, some other country will buy more from Brazil. Global prices will be not much changed, a little bit differences in transportation cost. And America's trade deficit overall will remain unchanged, but the trade deficit with China will go down. And he will feel good about that. So even though the macroeconomic picture for the United States will be unchanged, that's the kind of thing that will make him feel like he's won this particular battle.
Mm-hmm. He's also talking about imposing tariffs on Mexico, on Canada, of course, like 10-20% on the Europeans or the rest of the world. Are you concerned with like a global trade war? Or why is he imposing tariffs on the Canadians, on the Mexicans?
I mentioned before, he says he loves tariffs. I think behind a lot of concern in the United States is one issue. American economy proved itself having a lack of resilience. In COVID-19, we couldn't even make masks. When COVID-19 happened, all my friends in China sent me masks because they were worried about me. But America, we couldn't get them. And we realized then that we had lost our economic sovereignty in a way. We were too dependent on others. So there is an argument that is being widely discussed is that somehow we have to regain more resilience, more economic sovereignty. But tariffs is not the right way of doing it. But it's a way that he sees in his limited understanding of economics of doing it. I think there is a very high likelihood that Europe would retaliate. The end of that, let me put it more precisely. He has threatened tariffs. Europe has already threatened retaliation. I think before much happens, there may be we may impose a tariff for a short while. They may do that for a short while, but then we'll get into negotiations, and there'll be some negotiated settlement that will make him feel like he got a victory. But it will be not of much substance. You know, he renegotiated NAFTA. It was really, if you looked at it, not much different from the original agreement. So he likes to negotiate, and he likes his name on the negotiation. So you just have to sort of understand that it's less about substance than about appearance.
You mentioned, of course, Trump loves tariff, but the Biden government obviously, didn't remove the tariffs. Instead, they have more, a growing tariff on goods from especially China, and probably we are going to see more, from Trump again. And also, the Biden government has imposed basically increasing restriction of exports of U.S. technology or high-tech products to China, so-called small yard, high fence policy. Do they have the intended effects already?
No, they probably don't. From the people that I've talked to, it's in the chip area, very specialized areas, which I don't view as my expertise, but I've talked to a lot of people in the area. What they say is that it has stimulated China to work harder, to catch up faster. And that's what you would expect the effect of those actions to be. China realizes that it has to be more self-reliant, and therefore you might say there's a race to catch up very quickly. China has some big advantages. It has more engineers. It has a bigger market. domestically, and also the chips that you put in manufactured goods that you export around the world. In many areas, the advantages of coordination are significant. So I think that these policies have not been thought out as well as they might have.
China is developing rapidly in terms of this green technology, solar panel, battery, EVs. But at the same time, we do see there's a rise of, people would call it the protectionist measures, tariffs from Europe, from U.S. How do you see the future?
Well, let me say, I think China's contribution in getting lower prices of solar panels and low-cost EVs is a major contribution to saving the planet. And they succeeded in advancing technology that is of a public good, a global public good.
In the field of green transition, the structure of China's power generation has accelerated from coal-based to diversified and clean transformation, with the proportion of newly generated clean energy increased to 27.2% by the year 2023. Taking solar energy as an example, 425 gigawatts of new solar power was installed around the world in 2023, with 62% from China. Furthermore, in terms of solar and wind plants, all the Group of Seven together barely installed 1/4 of that of China in 2023. The change has not only happened on the production side. The share of clean energy in total energy consumption also rose from 14.5% in 2012 to 26.4% in 2023. China now has topped the world both in the production and sale of electric vehicles 8 years in a row. And in the year 2023, Chinese EVs eliminated carbon emission amounting to 50 million tons.
I think, again, it's important for Western countries to have that technology. There could be a transfer technology, but that doesn't happen right now. So they have to develop that technology on their own. The way they're going about it, through protectionism, I think is the wrong way of doing it. What they should do is support research, support efforts of the universities and private companies to produce a more efficient EV, more efficient solar panels. Let's have a competition to produce the best solar panels, not protectionism. So I think, and the point is, the object of industrial policy is not to create, trade policy is not to create jobs. That's macroeconomic policy. And the object of solar panels and the EVs are to save the planet. And that should be given first priority.
Will protectionism work in terms of developing their own EVs, their own batteries, for example?
Yeah, I think it will, but they will be less efficient. I think, as I say, it's not the optimal way, but in that yard, behind that wall, there is enough demand for electric vehicles that at the high prices, there will be incentives to produce them. But in the meanwhile, a lot of people who want a cheaper EV won't be able to afford it, and so we'll have more pollution, and so our planet will suffer. So the real cost here is for our whole planet.
Well, taking into consideration of this rising tariffs and also the manufacturing jobs capacity, are we seeing the end of globalization, or even a weakened free trade belief?
What is very clear is that the theories of Adam Smith and David Ricardo that said free trade was the religion that's ended. We have a more complicated analysis. We understand that they make some very peculiar assumptions. You know, Adam Smith wrote Before the Age of Innovation. He was talking about making pins. David Ricardo talked about trade in wool and port. We live in an innovation era, and in that era, what we've been talking about, innovation, how do we promote innovation, becomes critical. And free trade does not necessarily promote innovation. So you have to have a more nuanced policy. In the Adam Smith world, there was no risk. Risk is important, and free trade can increase risk. And we have to think of better ways of managing those risks, and that's why a lot of people are unhappy about globalization. So, as I argued in my book written 20 years ago, Making Globalization, Globalization Extinct its Intents, globalization rightly has generated a lot of discontent. And then I wrote in my later book, Making Globalization Work, there are ways that we can make it work better. We haven't done that. And now, as 40 years of mismanaged globalization has come to a head, there will be a certain degree of deglobalization, but what I hope comes out of this is not the end of globalization, but a rethinking of globalization and putting it on a better basis where it promotes the well-being of ordinary citizens in all countries.
Mm-hmm. When will that come, that kind of time, people would agree on a new globalization or new trade relationship, for example, between China and the U.S.?
I think we're looking to 2028.
2028.
When we have a new president in the United States, Trump's term is over, and hopefully we will have a president that understands more economics and understands that there are benefits to trade and to globalization, but you have to manage globalization better, that the WTO rules were not appropriate. We're based on a simplistic theory, and we have to, and we saw that during the pandemic when we have vaccine apartheid. And people in the poor countries couldn't get the vaccines. It's clear those rules were not in the interest of ordinary people all over the world. So now, beginning in 2028, I hope we begin rethinking globalization.
We have 4 times to rethink about it.
We have 4 years to,
4 years,
to think about what we should do once we have a better politics.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank
you for speaking to us.
Thank you.